All right, everyone. I'm very, very excited about our first paper for the symposium this morning, and I'm excited to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Michelle Chin. And her paper is Viewing Art Through Information Visualization, a case study of Bob Ross's The Joy of Painting. Dr. Michelle Chin is currently assistant professor at the School of Information at San Jose State University and has taught at several universities, including UT Austin, UConn, and the University of San Francisco. Dr. Chin is also a faculty member of the Silicon Valley Big Data and Cybersecurity Center. Her primary areas of research and teaching interests include large-scale data visualization, data mining, social media, and online user behavior. I've had the pleasure of taking a class with Dr. Chin, and I've been super excited about this paper since I first heard about it last fall. So with that, Dr. Chin, if you are ready to take the mic, you can go ahead, and I will make you moderator.
Thank you, Jeremy, for the invitation and the introduction. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. So I see some familiar names in the participants list, and it's really nice to see you here. So today it is my great pleasure to be here and to present the research project that students from my information visualization class last year proposed and developed. Viewing Art Through Information Visualization, a case study of Bob Ross's The Joy of Painting. So here's the agenda. I'll first talk about the motivation and background of the study, what information visualization is about, and its role in digital humanities. And next, I'll explain the data sets that we dealt with in this study, followed by the visualization analysis that we've done for Bob Ross's paintings. And I will conclude the presentation with some discussions and future work. So before I start talking about the project itself, I would like to briefly go through what information visualization is, just to give you some sort of background in case you are not really familiar with this field. So visualization, by definition, is the creation of two-dimensional or three-dimensional representations of data that enables new discoveries of insights and knowledge. It is also the use of computer-supported interactive visual representations of data to amplify cognition. So it really focuses on psychological or cognitive and perceptual basis of human beings. So the culture of digitization that characterized the digital humanities throughout the past decade significantly magnified the volumes of the data. And scholars began to increasingly use information visualization to look at not just the content, but also stylistics, genre, and related metadata over a historical period. And the unique pattern finding capabilities of the human visual system in visualization makes it a great tool and very ideal tool for many different domains in digital humanities, and we'll talk about some of them in just a moment. So how can information visualization be used to aid research and practice in digital humanities? Here I've listed three main reasons that explain scholars and practitioners' adoption of information visualization, not only as a tool, but very often as a methodology. So first, while much of the information can be conveyed through text, many new visualization tools are appealing precisely because they can communicate certain ideas better than verbal language alone. So it's just like an old saying goes, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and people find it really powerful and helpful to see things visually instead of just reading through the text. And the second uniqueness of information visualization is that it can take literally any number of forms of data and transform it into any number of chart styles, ranging from a geographical map-based visual display, a word cloud that we just saw, and a visualized network of social relations, and many more. So this helps address different purposes and application needs for the digital humanities community. Know the real power of visualization lies in its ability to make powerful arguments and to show data in a way that raises new questions, new insights, and new knowledge. And finally, as we've already mentioned briefly, information visualization is not only about data analysis and understanding data better, but another important usage of information visualization comes in its ability to facilitate communications and enhance the storytelling experience. And I hope you can get some sense of it from the presentation today, where we use visualization to analyze the artistic process of an artist. So this aspect of visualization is usually domain and audience dependent, which makes it quite challenging, but at the same time opens up a lot of different opportunities and gives the users and the viewers a lot of flexibility. So information visualization has been used in the digital humanities area in many different domains and applications. Here are just some of the examples of the prior work that I think are interesting. Information visualization has been widely discussed in the film and motion picture industry. For example, the first project here introduces a new tool that parses screenplays and outputs statistical values which can be analyzed and offers 4 different types of visualization, each with its own utility. Visualization has also been adopted in enhancing design, learning, and even instructional experience. So for example, visualizing knowledge can be used as a part of the design activity for problem solving. We've also seen visualization applications capable of enabling research into the socio-political landscape. And in this case, it is about the ancient Greek world social political analysis by Krishnan et al. And the researchers actually digitized Oxford Classical Dictionary entries regarding over 2,300 people and demonstrated the way that data visualization can facilitate original scholarly research employing large and highly rich data sets. Visualization is also being applied in religious study, and as you can see from the reference here. However, we found that less frequently have researchers considered how information visualization can be used to actually analyze and assess an artist or even artwork or a historical period of visual culture, and that's what motivated the research here. So again, this research project is an extension from the final project that students did for my information visualization class last year. In this presentation, I will use we and the students interchangeably, but I would like to emphasize that the students are the main creators and contributors of this project. So I'm kind of presenting the work on their behalf. And so recent studies on the previous slide that we just showed you, it shows that data's potential to help us understand large, almost incomprehensible trends. So we believe and we try to think about that data describing images should also allow us to consider artistic creation quantitatively rather than just subjectively. So this project examines data about 403 images that were painted by the famous Bob Ross's PBS series, The Joy of Painting. And we analyzed a set of data that describes his artistic output, which is realistic landscape painting. And looking at the set of the output data suggests more complex things about the emotion, the memory, and the act of painting itself. It presents a model for considering other artists with large viewer and large image sets. So about the data, we started with the data set that describes the paintings created in Bob Ross's 11-year run of his PBS series, The Joy of Painting, and using 67 keywords drawn from Ross's narration on the show. Walt Hickey, which is referenced here, tagged all 403 images painted. And out of these 403 images, Ross painted 381, while the guests that he invited painted the remaining 22. So Hickey published a set of 3,224 tags on the 538 blog and also the GitHub for public use. And here's just a snapshot of what the data looks like. We can see that each row stands for each episode with fields including the title and different features or so-called tags that are associated with this episode, such as apple frame, barn, and bushes. So our project uses this data to tell the story of how Ross combined elements to create credible imaginary spaces. Because the data examined a quite homogeneous body of images whose creative process is the explicit subject of the joy of painting, they present an important counterpoint to earlier discussions of cataloging visual art, which have focused on images far removed from the context and the language of the artist. So it also provides a model for other large image sets for which their creators have provided some description or narration. So there were a total of 5 main different sets of visualizations that my students developed in order to examine the artistic creation process and the hidden painting styles in landscape, man-made representations, adjectives used in Bob Ross's titles, and also the mood analysis from his paintings. And the first one here, we used the data to examine how the elements that Ross used to create his landscape changed over the show's run. So I hope you can see it a little bit more clearly, but the sheer number of images seemed daunting to show in a single visualization. So Ross painted at least 1 canvas per episode for 13 episodes per each of the 31 seasons. So that's a lot of different images. And the individual instances actually obscure the overall trajectory. Therefore, the students decided to track the elements by the number of times they appeared in a season. So to show the relative quantities of each element with the help of a software called Tableau, we created a bar chart that showed how many times each landscape element appeared during each season. And to maintain the visuality that the original data described, we used the symbols and ordered them in the bar chart, just as Ross might have placed them on the canvas. So the chart produces a sort of average image for each season, tracking the changes in Ross's use of landscape elements and the type of landscapes he produced. And the number of trees remained stable, as we can see here, while other elements, such as grass, vary tremendously. So that's the first analysis that we look at the individual elements. The second visualization looks at how Ross combines these individual elements to create cohesive images and spaces for his viewer. And here a network graph representing the probability of an element's co-occurrence in a single canvas was presented, and it reveals obvious structures and patterns. So the thickness of the line connecting elements indicates how often these elements appear together. And the elements that appear most frequently, and the famous happy little trees that appear in about 91% of the paintings from the center, form the center of the graph. And less frequent elements are at the periphery. So this visualization and grouping of the elements of Ross's landscape revealed some patterns of his work and also the artistic creation process. Once Ross had painted 1 tree, he would nearly always paint more. And he painted deciduous trees only slightly more often than their evergreen counterparts, and was slightly more likely to surround them with grass than snow. And with the cirrus clouds appear more than puffy cumulus clouds. And the graph also suggested how crowded Ross made his paintings and the number of elements he packed into just 30 minutes of each episode. And elements that appeared only twice during the show's run, such as flowers or palm trees, are connected to another dozen different elements. And each node or each element has an intuitive color to suggest the palette that the data reflect. And for example, trees are green, the lines indicating the relationship between the elements makes these colors. And the use of color gives the graph a unique connection to Ross's work that lines alone could not express. So that's one of the interesting and unique aspects that I found from the students' work. So they're trying to kind of match the creation of the visualization to the actual artwork from the artist. So the third analysis focuses on how often Bob Ross painted man-made objects such as cabins, lighthouses, and fire, which is something that would have been started by person rather than a natural phenomenon. So this visualization here illustrates the totals for objects painted broken down by seasons of 10. The first seasonal decade, which comprised of seasons 1 through 10, are green. And the color scheme is meant to, again, evoke thoughts of the ground, the sea, and the sky. And the middle seasons are blue because he painted more rivers during this period. And the third seasonal decade is yellow because it makes viewers think of the sun. So the result demonstrates that some decades Ross painted more man-made objects than others. He also varied each decade with natural objects such as trees and rivers. And we tend to associate Ross with happy trees concept. However, the image above shows that Ross painted more than just mountains and trees in every painting. And this visualization here is also related to the man-made representations, but it focuses only the man-made objects that Ross painted broken down by seasonal decade. And it uses the same data from the previous graph. However, it does not compare artificial objects with natural objects. This graph demonstrates he did not paint a man-made object in every episode. It also shows that he varied by seasonal decade. And the man-made structure he most often painted was actually a cabin, and he painted 25 or more in 2 decades. It is interesting also to know that Ross only painted 1 lighthouse, 1 fire, and 1 windmill in his entire career, which I found very interesting. And the objects that he did paint were often tended to add perspective and dimension to a painting, such as a fence or a path. So this graph shows that Ross really put a focus on nature. He did not want many artificial elements, and this is truly the underlying story for Bob Ross, which objective is that the nature's beauty was the purpose of the paintings. So based on this observation, we also wanted to show the very small numbers for the man-made objects versus the large amounts of nature data points. And so we created this visualization. So in this visualization, 91% of the objects he painted were nature-related, such as trees, mountains, and seascapes. 9% of all of his work was man-made. So they were, this was a really small number. So there were about 3,081 total objects painted, but only 287 of those were artificial objects. So while landscapes were the focus, things like a cabin or a barn added extra visual interest and perspective, which is why it is good to focus on the details here. And because when you look at the whole data set or the all the images over the 11-year run, these little artificial man-made objects can really get lost in all of these trees and mountains. The next visualization explores the adjectives used in Bob Ross's painting titles to identify trends and themes in his reflection of his paintings. So the goal here was to identify the values and emotions attributed to the works from the author's perspective. So Ross's paintings presented several adjectives genres such as color, mood, seasons, landscape, and water. And here we started off by analyzing the use of color terms used as adjectives in Ross's paintings. So in this visualization, the size of the circles represents the frequency that the color term being used as an adjective in the Ross titles. We see that there was a strong presence of golden and blue tones, which are then accompanied by a combination of the warm and neutral color terms. Interestingly, we see a strong presence of autumn colors, which corresponds to the prevalence of autumn-themed paintings. The more neutral tones, combined with the blue and green references, further highlight the strong presence of winter-themed paintings. And the fifth visualization, which is the final one here, shows how Ross describes the moods of paintings within each painting's title. Again, the relative size of each colored circle represents the prevalence of an adjective in Ross's genre. He clearly preferred quiet and tranquil. And the common effects of watching Ross paintings are and upsided reason of the show's enduring popularity. The melancholy undertone to that serenity that the visualization reveals is kind of surprising to us. Lonely and secluded loom over happy, and enchanted always plays a larger role than one might expect. So despite their realistic appearance, Ross's paintings were figments of his imagination. He began with the imagined or remembered image of a landscape, unmediated by and thus kind of incomparable to the reality. And the visualization forces us to consider the role of fiction actually on his the joy of painting works. And this one is one of the visualizations that I found really creative from the students too. So these are, I know given the amount of time that we have, we can really go deeper into each visualization analysis and the actual technologies. But I know students actually combine Tableau, Many Eyes, and some basic Excel manipulation to present the data, and especially some when you say look at this one where they extracted a small number of the man-made objects and kind of magnify it into a larger pie chart really takes them some work. And also the first one here, which I really appreciated, was the creation of the individual elements which were kind of aligned according to how Bob Ross painted his artwork too. So this research shows how the artistic creation process could be better understood through semantic analysis and visualization of an artist's description of their own work. So Ross wanted to make the complex, intimidating task of landscape painting simple, and he uses a spare palette and guides the viewer step by tiny step through its creation. Because of its simplicity, Ross is remembered best as more like a pop culture curiosity than a true artist. However, as the data reveal, Ross's work was in fact very complicated. His subdued manner belied the planning and skillful execution that artfully arranging hundreds of elements required. The data also revealed that he painted and talked about his paintings in a way that made possible, which is the ability to transform mistakes into happy accidents. So he tried to avoid people, animals, and even specific places that could be judged to be inaccurate statistically. I see a question here, and I'll get back to that later. So the data from The Joy of Painting presents an opportunity for not just for art historians or enthusiasts of 1980s kitsch, but also information professionals tasked with classifying images or developing databases for art markets. Finally, although the data contains about 3,224 tags, it was still limited in scope and drew from Ross' narration of what he was doing rather than looking at the works after the fact. So studying the paintings themselves will be difficult because they've been dispersed to different TBS affiliates across the country. Further analysis, we hope, could examine Ross's language beyond adjectives and nouns. So we might look at how he described and conceived of the act of painting, whether it changed over time, and whether what he painted affected his language. And perhaps it will reveal no patterns, and it was all, as Ross claimed, a happy accident. So this is about the presentation and the research. The initial version, the very initial version of this research was actually accepted and presented at a poster session of ASIST last year, and we're now extending the paper to a journal submission targeted at Digital Humanities Quarterly. And again, I would like to give all the credits to my students, Andrea Hall, Elaine Hall, and Ariane Breton, who have proposed and created such an interesting project. And I see some of the questions here, and I'll get back to them. But I'm sorry I won't be able to stay till the end of the wrap-up and Q&A session at the end of the symposium today. But the questions and comments are always welcome and greatly appreciated. Here is my email. Please feel free to drop me a note. So thank you very much, everyone. So the first question here we have is this manual analysis, or do you use software like Photoshop? No, we don't use any software to extract the data from a file, especially like photograph of Rossi's paintings. The data set that we have are the more like a metadata or the tags that describe the narratives that Bob Rossi's painting. So that's something that he talked about when he created the work, not really the paintings itself. So as I mentioned in the future work, or some of the limitation of the project is that it's really difficult to look directly into the work and do the visual analysis on that. So what we started out, or the students started out, was by looking at the text, the textual text, which was actually created and generated based on the actual paintings, but they are still more like text-based. Is there a digital archive of his work? That's a good question. I'm not really sure, so I can't give you a definite answer here. So again, we didn't really look at the actual work, but more like the textual narrative and the text that describe this narrative. But I'll definitely look into it, and I'll get back to you. And on the chart. Yes, I think the data, that's a really good question about whether the Tableau file and data set available. I will ask my students. I actually did ask them, but it was kind of last year, so they are trying to get the data for me because I'm actually trying to find that for this presentation. But I believe they're available. So no, we didn't use any control vocabulary for the co-occurrences. It's actually all kind of automatically mined and discovered through the whole visualization process. So the co-occurrences were kind of, they just pop out once the visualization was created, and we didn't do any control vocabulary intervention. These are great questions. Thank you very much. Any other questions and thoughts? And again, feel free to drop me a line in my email, and I will either forward it to my students to answer those questions, or I will get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you very much. Back to you, Jeremy. Thank you.